And the women that you serve, um, taking one step even behind that, our culture has such an open environment when it comes to sex and all of that, married, not married, in a lot of ways it doesn't matter culturally. And then in the church, obviously those messages are very different. And you mentioned the home you grew up in. That would not have been a conversation you would have felt able to have, with your parents. So just about that aspect of the women that you see today, is there shame there? Is that something they even think about? What's the perspective among the women that you see about the decisions even before that led them to get pregnant in the first place? What would you do if you found yourself pregnant, if you hadn't planned to be? I'm Dr. Carol, and as an OBGYN physician, I have delivered countless babies over many years. I've lost count. Sometimes I have the privilege of helping a child come into the world with a room full of family members. The mother is supported. This has been a prayed for, wanted baby. I've also been in the room and delivering a child when the mother is alone in every way. I've delivered babies born in rape or incest. Sometimes the situation a woman finds herself in is complicated and violent and devastating. These realities aren't things that some people particularly like to think about, and they're more complicated than many of us might think about. And yet, God does have answers. It may not be a simple answer, but it is a good answer. I have known Deborah McGregor for some years now. She is the president and CEO of CareNet Pregnancy Center of Central Texas in Waco, Texas, offering services to women who find themselves with a crisis pregnancy. In this conversation, we talk about some of the stories behind the stories. What's behind some of the situations that lead women to need the kind of care that Deborah and those who work with her are able to provide, and about the decisions and how difficult those decisions can be for some women who find themselves pregnant. And we also back up and talk about the situations that lead or may lead women to take a risk that might end up getting them pregnant in the first place. What would lead them to have sex in that situation? We address that, and we talk about what the rest of us can do that can make a difference. I think this will be an enlightening and encouraging conversation. So here's Deborah McGregor. Well, Deborah McGregor, you have been a friend, and we've connected in some really great ways over the last few years. This is the first opportunity I've had to share you with our podcast audience. As the leader of a pregnancy care center not far from where I live here in Central Texas, I would just love to start with hearing about what brought you to this really important field. I doubt when you were in 9th grade, you decided, I'm going to be CEO of a pregnancy care center. What kind of brought you to this?
Well, I went to school. First of all, they didn't have degrees in nonprofit management. So yeah. I seriously thought that nonprofit meant that you just spend all the money. That you tell me how much I have, we give it all away. So no, I didn't. The issue of unplanned pregnancies and abortions weren't necessarily high on my radar until after I'd had my first child. I had a dear friend who was, one day I went over to visit her house, and I called her like my leftover hippie friend. She was a person that needed a cause.
Yeah.
And so she had pamphlets laying around her table that she was writing letters to, I think, legislators and stuff. And I looked at one of them and I saw it was one of an aborted baby. Mm-hmm. And I just said, what is that? And she explained to me that was abortion. And it just, like it just shook my core. I just thought, how in the world is that okay? Now,
Mm.
this was, I went to college in the 80s. And so I don't know if they had ultrasound back then,
Yeah.
but I know that when I had my first child, they did. So I'm not sure. But when I realized just what it was, what abortion really was, I knew immediately that that was not something that I could say was good. At the same time, knew women, and I myself would have been one that had I been in an unplanned pregnancy, especially in college, I probably would have done the same thing because the
Wow.
thought of going home from a Christian university telling my parents that I was having sex, let alone pregnant,
Yeah.
would have devastated them, would have brought shame to my family. And I mean, I don't know what I would have done or what I thought they would have done, but there's no way I would have had that conversation with my parents.
Mm.
So just knowing what it was, fast forward, it wasn't a part of my life. It wasn't something I had to worry about. But I went to law school, graduated from college, went to law school, became an attorney, was a practicing attorney for 10 years. I had divorced before I went to law school, then remarried. We had a child. So I was close to 40 when I had my last child. I decided when I had her that I wanted to stay home and remember raising a child because the other ones I had just gone through school and drug along with me.
Yeah.
And so during that time, I was also an adjunct professor at a community college uh, in the paralegal program, which allowed me to be with what they call displaced mothers. A lot of them were women who had gotten divorced or whatever and were going back to work or had for some reason gotten their schooling had gotten sidelined.
Yeah.
And so I really began to have a heart. That's where God developed a heart for me for women that were making it alone for whatever reason. And after doing that for 5 years, I had decided that I would go back into full time practice when my youngest went to kindergarten. But I prayed all through that time that God, if there's anything else you want me to do, let me know. I loved practicing law. I love to go back to that. But if there's anything else, just let me know. And so there was an ad in a pregnancy care center here in Waco that I happened to see while I was waiting in a doctor's office and stop by to see what is that? What do y'all do there?
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, it's ministry. I'm pro-life. I mean, how hard can it be? That's kind of what, and you get to spend all the money. It's a nonprofit. And
Yeah.
so I went in with, I mean, even though I had 19 years of school, I knew nothing about it. I just thought, I also thought that, there were two sides. There was pro-life, pro-abortion. I knew I was pro-life. So I was really naive in that respect. But so that's where my heart grew for the women that were going it alone, women that were making it alone. I had been a single mom. I knew what it was like to be on government assistance
Yeah.
because I had the father of my children didn't support us. And so I put myself through law school, undergraduate and law school. So I knew how hard that was. I knew how humiliating it was to go in to the offices where you have to go when you're on government assistance and just how you feel. I'm not saying that's how people would make you feel, but it's just how you feel. And then working with single moms in the program, the community college program, I already had a heart for that. Um, Also, while I was in college, I was date raped.
Mm.
And so I, again, given the home and standards that I was raised with, that was not something that I would have gone home and told my parents that
Yeah.
had happened.
Yeah.
But it kind of stuck in the back of my mind. I mean, thank God I wasn't pregnant from that. But I did some research before I took the pregnancy center job because I knew that there were women out there that had that same type of scare, especially college women.
Sure.
In my research, I found that over 70% that a survey was done uh, that over 70% of men in college that were surveyed, if given the opportunity to date rape a girl without getting caught, would have said yes.
Wow.
When I read that survey and when I read the results of that, that was kind of, and I went into the board and when I interviewed with them, I just said, I know I didn't share my personal story, but I did say, I know this is happening and I know this is a college town and I know how often this happens, especially with young girls, and they think that it's their fault and they don't tell anybody. And
Yeah.
I am sure that had I been pregnant from that assault, that I would have gotten abortion. There's no question in my mind that's what I would have done.
Wow.
It was before I learned. But when I looked back, I just went, oh, but for the grace of God, there go I. And
Hmm.
so I just felt like I could relate. I just felt like, even though that's not my personal story, the circumstances are, I just had a different result, a different outcome.
Yeah. Wow. That kind of empathy, just to see uh, how you might have ended up in that situation, and realize that it's unlikely any of the young women that contemplate or end up having an abortion wake up one day and say, I think I'll kill my baby today.
Yeah.
It's that there's a story behind there. There's a human that uh, this is a weighty disruption to their life. It's not something that is just cavalier, and understanding that, I think, really makes a difference when
Yeah.
those of us that are, quotes, not in that situation right now, when we look at the problem, which is huge.
Hmm.
It's a big deal. I'm thinking right now of a trip I took overseas. This has been a number of years ago now, like a couple decades, quite some time ago. It was a missions trip. I was with a Christian organization, and as an OBGYN physician, I remember one of the pastor's wives in this foreign country. I won't name the country at the moment, but she came up to me and was just so covered in shame. They had no safe birth control there. As a pastor, they had almost no income, extremely limited income, and she had had a couple abortions because they felt like they could not feed more children. And she was just heart wrenched about that part of her story, and just to understand some of those things that people wrestle with, whether or not that's the particular kind of question the young women you deal with are. It's not an easy, simple thing.
No, no. And I mean, I'm going to say at least half of the women, if not more, that come to see us, that we serve in the pregnancy center arena, at least half of them have other children. So
Mm.
one, two, three other children. It's not those women that are in that crux of that decisiveness or indecisiveness are usually about between the ages of 19 and 25. They oftentimes have 1 to 3 children. Um, and it's very much I can't already take care of the ones that I have.
Mhm.
And so it's a sacrifice. Also, they're looking at, you know, where they live, the kind of car that they drive. I mean, one more child can tip you over to having to have another car, having to have another apartment, or where you live. If they have CPS cases, CPS in their lives, then they're going to be required to move into a bigger place. So it's like a lot of different things. It's oftentimes, and that's the women that we serve that are probably in what I would say some kind of situational, if not generational poverty.
Yeah.
But then there's also the younger women, and then the older women, younger women in that, you know, this is going to wreck my home, that I live in. I can't leave my home. It's either going to wreck the home that I know, or it's going to wreck my opportunity. Or you have women who were, they may have 6, 8, 10 years since they've had their last child. And then to not only explain, it's one thing to explain if you're married. I mean, I had a child at 40, but I was married.
Mhm.
But especially if you're not married, it's just, one of those things that they just can't imagine.
Yeah.
And so we see it all, but there are some similarities in as far as where the ages are and the poverty, and then even those women that are, some would consider affluent. There's this idea of, how could you be so stupid? How
Mhm.
could you let this happen? And so they just make it unhappen.
Yeah. Yeah. And the women that you serve,
Mhm.
um, taking one step even behind that, our culture has such an open environment when it comes to sex and all of that, married, not married, in a lot of ways, it doesn't matter culturally. And then in the church, obviously, those messages are very different. And you mentioned the home you grew up in. That would not have been a conversation you would have felt able to have,
Right.
with your parents. So just about that aspect of the women that you see today. Is there shame there? Is that something they even think about? What's the perspective among the women that you see about the decisions even before that led them to get pregnant in the first place?
Um, I have had the opportunity. I teach some classes in the pregnancy center environment, so I get to know some of these ladies really well.
Yeah.
And it's a small sampling, if you would, but I actually asked the question this last semester. I was teaching a class, and I just, asked them. I said, if I were to describe the the thought that you had in your mind when you decided to take a risk that you knew might result in a pregnancy, what would that be? And I just kind of did a canvas of about 19. I think there's 19 women in the class, and I
Yeah.
just said, I want y'all to just, it was a Zoom class, and I said, just tell me, type in the chat, what was going through your mind when you made the decision to take a risk, whatever that looked like, whether it's love or convenience or intoxicate, whatever it was.
Right. Right.
And the most common thing that I was told was, we just wanted connection. We
Mhm.
were looking for connection. Many of them were single moms with other children. And
Yeah.
what they said was, we don't have an opportunity. We don't have babysitter. We don't have an opportunity if, some man showed us attention,
Mhm.
and we were so starved for connection with the opposite sex that we took a risk.
Yeah.
So out of that, I just said, well, would you play softball if we got together a co-ed softball league? Would that be something that, and I was joking, but I wasn't joking. I said, if
Yeah.
you had an opportunity to connect with the opposite sex, that could high five or, even have human touch that was not in any way sexual, would that be satisfying? And they were just like, yes, that we crave attention from,
Hmm.
in a good way, but a lot of times the only time we get it is in a bad way, connection with the opposite sex. And so that was pretty much for all of them.
Yeah. That just is really telling to me. I'm
Mhm.
thinking of some conversations and reading that I've done recently from Dr. Kurt Thompson, and he talks about how deeply we as humans are looking to be seen, are looking to be known. And if we don't have that, uh, there's some ways in which we'll do just about anything to be seen and known.
Mhm.
And for those women in your class, just to express it that way, looking for a connection, that's so telling.
And it was not about sex at all. I mean,
Yeah.
we were in a free enough environment to where they could have said, and the way that I phrased the question was, what was going through your mind when you decided to take the risk?
Yeah.
And I mean, love wasn't, I don't think I got one answer that said love. Or, it was, like I said, overwhelming. It was, someone paid attention to me. I'm not around anywhere to get that. Um, and I just craved it. I just needed connection.
Yeah.
So,
When you, in the years you've been there at the pregnancy center, what are some things that might make a difference in these women's stories? We don't want to simplify it oversimplify it, and
oh
yet
yeah.
I believe that God has us here to make a difference. That's why you do what you do.
Hmm.
What are some things that would make a difference for these women? You've mentioned one, a place where they can connect.
Yeah. I mean, I think connection with the opposite sex at a good environment where they can experience emotions. That's why, whether it be a bowling league or a softball league or something where they can experience the victory of a win and the
Mhm.
humbleness of a defeat, and they can experience more than one emotion together. I mean, it would give variety to them. Um, I think that's something that's missing so much in our kind of compartmentalized world. I go to this friend or friend, if you would, on Facebook or social media for this, and I go to this friend when I'm sad, and this friend when I'm happy, and this friend when I need prayer. And so we're very compartmentalized where it comes to where we get what we get from whom. And I think that connection with the opposite sex in a good, wholesome environment would be something that they could experience emotions with. Is one of the things. I'm sorry, what was the? Tell me.
Yeah, let's also
Mhm.
absolutely, let's also talk about those women who do find themselves pregnant,
Mhm.
the women in crisis pregnancies specifically that you serve. What makes a difference in how they proceed and the decisions they make?
So, what makes a difference in the decision that they make?
About to keep the baby, what to do with the baby, to have an abortion or not.
Honestly, the thing that there's been a study there's been a study done by women exploited by abortion that found that the vast majority of women said that if they had had just one person to support them, they would have chosen to have their baby.
Mm,
Just one person to support them. Oftentimes, it's just the woman, maybe the woman and her partner or a parent who's paying for it or providing transportation
yeah,
will take her. Oftentimes, men will say, "I'll support you, whatever you decide to do," or parents, which is not what she wants to hear. What she wants to hear is, "I'll support you in in the decision to continue the pregnancy." Or I'll be there with you, not just I'll support whatever you decide, because that sounds like, well, you really want me to decide if I decide not to have this baby, then you won't be on the hook for it. And so I think telling a woman, absolutely, you are not alone.
yeah,
I will be with you, even if it's not the father of the baby. If it's anyone, I mean, if they'll take complete strangers, like those of us at the pregnancy care center, then they would certainly take someone in their life to say, I will be there for
wow,
you.
wow. Um, any particular, you know, women that you have worked with that come to mind? Obviously, we'll keep it anonymous, but just any little stories.
Well, a couple of years ago, I had a client that had a baby in my car.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know if I was if you and I knew each other then, but she was a girl that came to us. We had just opened a maternity home that we called a guest house. She was our very first client, and she had come to us. And like so many of the women that, especially in crisis pregnancies and in the maternity home kind of setting, a lot of them are women who have aged out of foster care,
Yeah.
and they have 2 or 3 children sometimes by the time they're 18 or 19. And she came in, she had 3 little boys, and she was living in our guest house. I told her when she came in, I'm as afraid of you as you are of me, because you're the first one. She had been through 37 foster home placements in California in her life. 37. She tried to get kicked out of every one so that she could be reunited or given back to her parents. So she came to Texas, and anyway, this young lady, she was her, yeah, she was a handful. I ended up asking her to leave the guest house environment because she couldn't get along with anyone. There was the father of her baby. Many times in a lot of the pregnancy clients that we see, they may have their lives may be so, you know, fractured that one of the things that they have, I guess, if you would call street cred, would be that I may have 4 children by the time I'm 22, but they all have the same father.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of dignity in having children that are by the same father, even if you're not married or even if they're in prison or wherever.
Wow.
But there's a stigma to having several children by several fathers, especially in the poverty community. Uh,
Interesting. Yeah.
Yes. And so she was very proud of the fact that all of her children had the same father. However, he was abusive. And long story short, she had gotten her own place. We maintained contact. We continued to serve her needs and provide for her and her children. When it came time for her to have the baby, as usual, he decided he got into an argument with her and left her at her home. And so I drove to get her. Ironically, it was Labor Day weekend, and I went to get her. Her 3 little boys, 3 stair step little boys, were standing on the front yard. I can still see it in my mind. And she was walking up and down the sidewalk, pacing in labor. Got her, I got all three boys buckled in, car seats. She was in my front seat. We're driving to the hospital, and she said, Miss Deborah, I don't think I'm going to make it. I don't think I'm going to make it in time for the epidural. I said, oh, you have plenty of time. Your water hadn't broken yet. About that time, Miss Deborah, and I went, oh no, oh no. So the whole time I'm telling the three boys in the back seat, Mom's fine. She's going to be fine. This is perfectly normal. Perfectly normal. It'll be fine. I wanted to stop and call an ambulance. She said, no, keep driving. So you do what a pregnant woman tells you in labor, like you keep driving. So we ended up, she delivered the baby in the front seat. She delivered her baby as I'm driving.
Wow.
And unwrapped the cord from around his neck and pulled him up to her. And I talked her through it, told the kids, see, Mom's fine now, slid in sideways into the hospital. And Mom and baby and those four boys are fine. They're doing well. They're in California. She has her own business. And anyway, that was my car baby. They called me the driving doula, Uber delivery, everything. Yeah, that was one of them. But she presents a profile of many of our clients in that she had a hard upbringing. Not everybody has foster care, but I mean, another story that I can tell you about that's kind of the exact opposite, but in its own way. We had a young lady that came to us that was raised in a very ultra uber religious homeschool community, very tight-knit community. And she left that environment, and she left and then got into drugs and then became pregnant and came to stay with us. And we have a maternity home, although a lot of pregnancy centers don't. That's just, our services are the same. That's just someplace where I get to really know some of these moms really well. And she had been given a diagnosis that her baby would probably not live outside the womb. And so she lived here with us throughout that pregnancy. And nobody ever loved that baby more than this mother loved this baby as she was carrying it. And when she delivered the baby, of course, it didn't live but a few minutes outside the womb. We had a funeral for her. We did a memorial for her. We gave her dignity. And I mean, not only the baby, but the mother. And she, we loved on her and cared for her through her postpartum and her grieving period.
Yeah.
And anyway, so the emotions were the same. It's just when you asked earlier about shame, when you have shame on top of grief and shame on top of guilt, it's just, when you've already got someone who may already be broken, even if it's by their own hands, it's just too much. It's just something that some women never crawl out from under.
Yeah.
So anything that we can do to, I'm not going to necessarily say normalize it, but in a way to normalize their behavior, not that it's normal that you're having unprotected sex and you're not married, but it's normal that you mess up. It's normal that we make mistakes. And that's what, God's not surprised, and he created a place for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that making a mistake isn't the end of your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I say all the time, there's no sin that God can't redeem for his glory if we let him.
Yeah.
I mean, he can use any sin in our past for his glory if we just let him.
Wow. As the body of Christ, the majority of our listeners are Christians and part of the body of Christ. What, from your perspective, would be some most important things that you would encourage the rest of us to be aware of or do, or where can we make some difference?
Well, I think one thing is, and there's really no way not to talk about it, because it's always in the news and it's always out there. But I'm going to say to talk about it, not debate it. I mean, I'm a lawyer by training, so I can get into a good debate, but this is one that it's like, we've already won. We already know God's on the side of life. He created it, but to talk about it, to not not take the excuse that it's political. I know that some churches will say, well, that's political. It's not political. Like,
Yeah. Okay.
this is not. I am the CEO of a nonprofit. I can tell you, I have to stay away from political things too. This is not political. This is absolutely within the church's purview to
Yeah.
instruct its members of what is true and what is biblical and what's God honoring. That doesn't take away the fact that there are a ton of good excuses of why it seems like a good idea. I
Sure.
agree. I agree. I mean, it's one of those things, sometimes I'll look at situations and think, God, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
But God is sovereign, and that's really all we need to know. It may not seem like it was a good idea, but to help someone to discern between what's God honoring and what's not, and then stand by them and don't take the cop out of it's political, we can't talk about it, because there's a whole group, I can tell you, we see about 2,500 just in the small town that I am a year that are wrestling with this decision of what now shall I do?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it needs to not only be spoken of in the church, but it needs to be something that it's okay to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to, to have different thoughts without it being taboo, for the church to not avoid it because they're afraid of a controversy. Don't start one, but
Sure.
just make it a natural part of, we value life. And you don't have to say we're anti-abortion. People will figure out,
Mm-hmm.
but we value life, and we value your life, and we want to stand with you if this is something you're dealing with.
And you made a statement a bit ago that I think is worth coming back to as we bring our conversation to an end, that most women in that situation, or at least the majority when asked, if there was one person that would stand by them and support them,
Yes.
they would keep the baby. They would carry the baby to to delivery. That one person to support them makes such a difference.
And support is hugging them, that physical touch, hug them. It's not necessarily taking them home. We in our organization can bring them home. That's one of the reasons why we built it. But it's just hugging them, giving them that kind look, crying with them, helping them, wringing your hands, saying with them, I know. I'm thinking the same thing you're thinking, but we know that's not the answer. So I'll wait with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just the waiting with them to see what God's going to do with it, and to support them in the waiting, and to not have all the answers necessarily.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I'm sure that many who are listening to us now, there is a pregnancy care center near them. And I just want to lend my voice that is such a great place to connect with. There can be, uniquenesses in different communities and what the pregnancy care centers do, but they're out there, and it's a place to connect and get involved and be part of God's answer for these women that need care.
Yeah. I often say, your worst day is our best day, because that's what we're created to do. So don't be afraid to come in because this is your worst day. That's the reason God created us. So that's our best day, is that He trusted us with you.
That's great. That's great. Well, Deborah, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your experience and your heart, and I believe God's heart for these women. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me.
If one person, the majority of women who find themselves in a crisis pregnancy, if one person would be there to support them, and they knew that, they would carry the pregnancy. Perhaps you are that person. Like Deborah said, maybe you can't bring them into your home, but maybe you can be that person to be with them, or support someone who can be with them. That is what we as humans, and especially those of us in the body of Christ, need to be. And perhaps there is also someone watching who you find yourself alone. And maybe you're pregnant, maybe you're not. but maybe you're putting yourself in that risky situation, whatever. It may be hard to believe, but there are people who care. If nothing else, I would love to hear from you. You can go to the contact page on our website, drcarolministries.com. You can certainly leave a comment under this video. But for confidential, to make it confidential, go to our website, drcarolministries.com, contact page, and leave me a confidential message. We don't have a slew of people answering those. It comes only to me, and I respond personally. I would love to hear from you and be someone to give you encouragement. And if you are in a crisis pregnancy and need some help to find someone to support you, we'll help you with that. I also know that Deborah McGregor would be very happy. If you have questions or comments, I will be happy to connect you with her. She would be delighted. Be that person to support someone in need. And whether it's a crisis pregnancy or not, that is what, in the body of Christ, it's all about. Thank you for being part of our family here online. And again, I would love to hear from you. Until next time, may God bless you.